Our guest today, State Representative John Patterson. And we've got a few things to go over. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the new governor, Michael DeWine, is talking about a gas tax. And somebody said that he had ran on a policy of no new taxes. I don't exactly remember that, but this would definitely be a tax.
Well, it is, and I sit on the Finance Committee, so we heard testimony. We have heard, I should say, the last 2 weeks. Now, keep in mind, today is Monday, February 25th, correct?
Yes.
And as such, by the time this airs, another week will have elapsed. And by then, we will be very close to coming up with a final recommendation because we have to get this over to the Senate. The transportation component of the budget has to be done in March.
So you have to know how much money you have to spend on roads and
exactly.
bridges and all.
So here's what's happened, Bob. We've heard testimony from ODOT, from the County Commissioners Associations, from the Municipal League and other organizations regarding the gas tax, even the Truckers Association. And quite frankly, the common theme was that the last administration kicked the can down the road. And quite frankly, the credit card's been maxed out. If you remember correctly, under Governor Kasich, we actually bonded the Ohio Turnpike for $1.5 billion to get back on track with projects that were so desperately needed. That money is gone now. In fact, with all the bonds that ODOT has to pay, our debt service alone is well over $300 million a year. So ODOT made this plea to us in no uncertain terms that they had a hole that was over $1 billion, that's B as in boy, $1 billion to fill, just to maintain and to finish the projects that were on the books, let alone anything new. Now, we've had some problems, for example, all the rain last flooding, southeast Ohio, roadways washed out. In fact, over the weekend, if you saw what happened on I-40, in Tennessee there, they had some tremendous mudslides closing down Interstate 40. Same things happened in Ohio. So we have to rebuild those bridges, and that's unexpected. That's over and beyond. That's that which has been allocated. And there's some other ongoing problems throughout the state. For example, in Cincinnati, the Brent Spence Bridge to Kentucky. We've got to do something with that, and we just keep kicking the can down the road. Well, the Kasich administration, rather than governing and taking steps to incrementally phase in some sort of a plan to help ODOT, virtually did nothing. Now, here's
just because it wouldn't look good for a presidential candidate to be.
That is what I'm hearing in Columbus. That's beyond
raising taxes.
I'm not going to speculate, but ODOT is here. ODOT is saying we have a crisis, and to his credit, Mike DeWine is indeed governing and trying to make those tough decisions that are sometimes unpopular, but the right thing to do. Now, here's what our people need to know. We have not, in Ohio, increased the gas tax since 2005. Okay. And back then, it was a 3-year phase-in, a 2 for a 6-cent total. Now, imagine trying to operate on the same budget with the increased costs in aggregate, stone, labor costs, with petroleum costs in terms of sealing and that sort of thing, living on the same cost intake that we did in 2005, 14 years. You just can't do it. And it's a fixed tax. Ohio's is 28 cents per gallon right now.
Now, this one would be factored for inflation, though.
It would. So it would increase from 28 cents by 18 cents to 46 cents a gallon. And then starting in July of 2020, it will be indexed based on the Consumer Price Index as a result of that legislation. So it would run and be directly reflective of inflation itself.
Now, would it go up 18 cents immediately, or would this more?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
It would.
Although I see gasoline prices going up 18 cents anyway.
It is crazy. There's no prediction there. I can tell you that 1 penny increase brings in, I think the figure is $67 million in income. And the feeling is that we need to do this now to take care of Ohio's infrastructure in the future. Now, when I first heard rumblings that this was going to be an increase. I was anticipating that he would roll out a 6, a 9, perhaps, and maybe even phase that in. But once we heard the testimony from ODOT and the Municipal League and the County Commissioners Association of Ohio, and the truckers, my gosh, they're all in agreement that we have to do something to address our crumbling roads and bridges. Now, nobody
So the
likes
truckers would rather pay more money in gasoline than put up with the roads.
because of the damage being done to their trucks.
Whoa.
It's cheaper for them in the long run to have the roads fixed. And here's something else that's important. I saw the map of the bridges that are underutilized because of their weight restrictions or absolutely closed because they cannot handle the trucks. Even our first responders weighed in. There are some places, especially in rural Ohio, where first responders have to take the long way around because the bridges cannot handle the weight of their trucks. Now imagine some of these fire trucks, and we want to get them to the scene. So it's not just roads, it is our bridges that have to have an investment made in terms of their maintenance over the long run.
We're still far below what Pennsylvania's is.
Pennsylvania's at 59 cents. This would be 40. Yeah,
46?
46, yeah. And the states around us are within a penny or two, except for Kentucky. Kentucky's down at 26. Indiana, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, within a penny or two. But Kentucky's is different because they actually charge property tax on rigs and such. And it's adjusted, I forget what somebody was telling me, like 1% a year, and I'm not that familiar with Kentucky law. But the point of the matter is it's deceptive. It's low, but they tax them in other ways. This is a user fee. More you use, the more you pay. Now, I also want to make sure that our folks know we're looking at the electric vehicles, too, because right now they are not being charged a cent, and they're still using our highways. Not to a large extent, because it's coming. Within the next decade, there are going to be a lot more electric vehicles. And they understand. We even heard from some of their interested parties that they're willing to phase this in now, too, because the industry has a toehold. They were reluctant a couple years ago when we heard about this because they didn't want to have such a high tax on electrics that they were forced out right from the get-go.
Right.
It would be unaffordable to
They're
get
not
started.
getting the federal tax.
True. And I want to come back to federal government here in a short period of time. But we're looking at the alternative vehicles, too, because they put wear and tear on our road. Now, let's look at the feds. Feds haven't raised their gas tax since the early 90s. And you might say, well, how does that impact Ohio? Because the federal dollars come back to Ohio, too. And if they had limited dollars, it puts more of a stress on Ohio's budget, as opposed to sharing our infrastructure, like our interstate highway system, amongst all states in the union. Ohio's been forced to take a larger role in that. So because we are at the crossroads of America and we have so many bridges, and you look at the numbers, Ohio's in the top 5 or 6 for bridges that we maintain in terms of statewide compared to other states. The number of interstate miles we have and the intensity of the traffic on those miles, we have to take care of our infrastructure because it's about business. You look at the business groups, if we don't have transportation, it's going to cripple what we do as a state. Now, keep in mind, remember a few years ago when the bridge on Route 90 was closed over Grand River and the congestion we had and the problems we had there. And any time it's closed here, I-90 in Conneaut, it creates
Pennsylvania.
Let's talk about Pond Road. Remember last year when that thing...
Right. And Pennsylvania, even though they have a higher tax, their solution seems to be, at least just over the line, is just to take down the bridges. As opposed, because they have a larger percentage going to public transit than we do. Theirs is higher. But we want to be responsive. We need to hear from our people to see if they have any other thoughts. We're between a rock and a hard place right now. We have to maintain our infrastructure. The question is, how do we do that? How do we make it fair? How do we make it shared? Okay. So we should move on, but John Patterson, State Representative, is our guest. And you are explain this to me, you are co-chairing the Committee on Primary and Secondary Education. So you're equals with the Republican guy on this? Is
Yes,
that?
I am. Yes, I am.
And the Republicans, there's like 8 million Republicans per Democrat in the House and the Senate.
Well, it's 2-1, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite that anymore. But this was an idea that was floated by and accepted, floated by Speaker Householder and accepted by the House when we convened and agreed to our rules. First time I've been told now, I've not checked it out because I'm so busy doing the work of the committee, but I'm told it's the first time that we've actually had a committee co-chaired by a Republican and a Democrat in an effort to gain bipartisan support, especially with respect to school funding. Now, Representative Cupp is one of the most admired and respected legislators.
And he's the one that's co-chairing with you.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been doing a deep dive on school funding reform for the last year and a half. For the last 2 budgets, we both served, he was the chair, on the the primary secondary subcommittee on finance with respect to school funding. We have a wonderful, marvelous working relationship, and we're placing this effort well above partisan politics to do what's right for our kids, for Ohio's future, and for our taxpayers.
Too bad Washington doesn't do that.
Well, we're making history there in Ohio. So we've been in consultation. We formed a working group with treasurers and superintendents from around the state. We formed 8 different subgroups to look at the various components of funding public education. They've been making their recommendations to us, and we are in the next few days going to be making these, now that we have done some of the simulations and some of the calculations, be able to make this public so that we can share this information. Now, keep this in mind, Bob. We feel that if this is accepted, it will meet the muster of the 4 DeRolf decisions. If you recall, the DeRolf...
Way back in the 90s?
Way back in the 90s,
Yeah.
and then 3 other ones that followed the original case, that school funding in Ohio is unconstitutional because there's an over-reliance on the property tax. And what we've done is create a formula on the distribution side, create a formula that does have as its basis some property tax. Because you need to. Property tax is a component of the local share. The state can't cover everything, nor should it constitutionally. But layered over that is an individual district's personal wealth. And districts vary by their population, by their property wealth. So this formula takes into account what property valuations a district might have, the wealth the district might have, and that then, in brief, becomes the capacity of what a district ought to be raised on its own. So when we can figure out what the base cost of educating a student is, and that's what we've been working on in part, that's the one side of this equation. The other side is what is the fair share for the state and what is the fair share for the local. We have that calculated now. And so what's left, once we figure out the capacity of a local district and once we find out what that a student educated in that district should cost, then guess who fills in the missing link? It would be the state. The state.
Right.
So it's logical, it's practical, it's defensible, and quite frankly, the way this is designed, tailored exclusively and strategically for an individual district, it will rise and float with that district's own how can I say this? Own personalities.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got less than a minute left.
Less than a minute.
Broadband. Talk about that for 40 seconds.
Just as I walked into the office here, I was checking my emails. The request went out for co-sponsors on broadband legislation, and while you were setting up for this interview, I gave my yes, put my name on it as a co-sponsor. We are again going back to work to extend broadband.
So we're going to get it in Pierpont, Richmond Township.
That's the goal. If I can wave my magic wand, if we can get this moving, we'll do just that.
Hear that, Pierpont? They need it.
We're trying. I can't guarantee it, but I'm doing my part for my people.
John Patterson, State Representative, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Always a pleasure.